Okay, welcome back to Indie Insights Live. And I am thrilled this week because we are being joined by the one, the only, the founder, the CEO of Management One, Marc Weiss. Marc, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you, Dane.
So, Marc, we have a lot to talk about. But before we jump in, I just want to set some ground rules like we always do. The first is, and this is the biggest question we get, of course, we will be sending out the recording. You will get it in your email right after this session. And we are also going to be sending a very special report for you. So, we're going to break down a lot of what happened in independent retail in June, and we are going to send you that report right after this. But you're going to get some live analysis here. And then there is the chat and the question and answer here for everyone that's joining live. Please interact. This is your time to talk with myself, to get some FaceTime and direct chatting with Marc Weiss. So please put your chats, questions, thoughts, concerns, put them right there in the chat, and we would love to talk to you. We'll take questions at the end, but I jump in throughout the whole recording, and I will bring anything to the table. So let's start out. Say hello. Anybody in the that's in here right now, say hello, say where you're calling from, and we'll give you a little shout out to start the discussion. But Marc, I am super excited to talk to you because, and I know you're my boss, so I kind of have to say this, but I mean it from the heart. There is no one that is more passionate about independent retail. And, speaking with you about these topics, it just lights a fire, at least for me. And so I think that, that same spirit will come through. We're going to be talking about June and hopefully a lot of Q1, Q2, now that we're halfway through the year. So, Marc, I'm going to get started with we saw an 8.1% median sales increase across independent retail and across our client database. Give me the temperature that you're feeling right now out there in the market.
Well, thanks, Dane, and thanks for your kind words. I feel like the business, the customer has accepted inflation, and I think we're seeing the benefit of, the customer absorbing increased prices, and I think it's benefiting overall independent retail in a very positive way. So no matter what we've thrown, no matter what's been thrown at the consumer since post-COVID, it's been absorbed. So the appetite is there, the demand is there. I think independent retailers done a great job adjusting to circumstances. I think they've learned to be extremely flexible and agile in the way they run their businesses. And I think we're seeing great results because of it. I think
Yeah,
it's
and so isn't it so interesting because I feel like we've come to these pivotal moments, in my 6 years here at Management One, right? We went through COVID, we went through tariffs, we're going through gas prices right now, and we've seen this inflation all across the years. And every time we come to one of these moments, we say, the general public seems to say this is the one that's going to crash business through the ground. This is going to be the one that really trips us up, and yet the customers absorb the price.
Yeah, I think independent retailers have done a pretty good job absorbing the shock of all the news that happens in the economy. And, for once, I mean, I think they've really done super job just deflecting off of it and paying attention to their businesses. We've always talked about control what you can control. And I think they're doing a great job of it. I think we're seeing it in the results that we're seeing. And they're using, they're creating experiential retail. They're applying relationships. They're competing as well as they've ever competed. You've also seen a certain amount of change in the competition as well. So I think that's they've been able to pick up and benefit from that as well. So I think that's a big plus.
Yeah, and so now that we are, half the year is down, if you could believe it. We're in Q3. We have Q4 ahead of us, just around the corner. One of the things that I've really seen, and if I had to kind of put a bow on the first 6 months of the year, I think that there's a lot of optimism out there, and I haven't seen that in a while. There
Yeah.
really is just a spirit of positivity. What do you think, besides the, customers absorbing the price increase, what do you think is pushing the industry forward right now?
I think that there's a positive feeling because I think people really put their nose to the grindstone on and focused on their businesses in a way that, they're doing the things that make sense in their business. And I think they've adopted a lot of best practices. Necessity, they say, is the mother of invention. And I
Mm.
think independent retail has been, a highlight. I mean, I think they're the poster child of reinventing themselves over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think they're reaping the benefits of all those things. There isn't any one thing, there isn't one magic wand that changes business, but it's a summation of doing a lot of little things right. And I think the relationship our stores have with their customers, I think the relationship that the fact that they're focused on newness and being creative in their relationships has all done a lot. I mean, and I think you'll bring it up later, but I think it's a good example to bring up now. We did a webinar a couple of about 2 months ago on lease negotiation. And, from we'll talk about it later, from our client briefings, we've discovered that 1 out of 6 retailers are now negotiating with their vendors. I don't know if that came from us or came from them, but it's happening. So I think retailers are taking real action. And you don't go negotiate if you don't have a strong belief in your business. Maybe during COVID, we negotiated out of fear that we weren't going to be there, which was true. Nobody knew there was that uncertainty was unbelievable. But today, I think it's not generated from fear and uncertainty. I think it's more generated from confidence and, wanting to be profitable and wanting to turn every dollar we create into cash profit, as much of
Yeah,
it as
but
we can.
by the way, that was this Indie Insights live series has really been, in my opinion, a game changer. Something like that lease negotiation, the amount of feedback we got after that, and people that really went back, talked to their landlords, talked to their teams, and really made a difference is pretty incredible. So that
Yeah,
was
I mean,
great
I
to
would
see.
just continue to encourage people to take action on the things they do and realize that retail is the sum of doing a lot of little things right. Sure, when a vendor gets hot, you run it and it drives business and traffic, and that's all a wonderful thing. But that's not what drives 8.1% increases across the board. I mean, that's amazing. And I think that it just explains that don't try to outthink the market and don't try to just pay attention to your business and focus on the things that are working and build on those. And that's the real lesson. And I think that has to be what's happening.
Yeah, and I want to talk about benchmarking real quick because, I think it's so important for everyone to put into perspective where the entire industry is at, right? And when we say industry, we're talking independent retail verticals, which we'll get into specific verticals. But when you see that median increase at 8.1%, you're benchmarking yourself across the industry, and then we'll get more specific to the vertical by vertical. But I do want you to talk about, because I think this is pretty incredible, how we're getting this information, right? And I think that this is, at least for me, and being in it every day, seeing how we at Management One have really been able to just be a powerhouse of independent retail intelligence. So, can you talk a little bit about why these numbers are so important?
Yeah, well, I want to start by saying that I feel like I'm in the Disneyland of retail because all the things that I dreamed about being able to do in the 30 years, well, actually 40 years that I've been in this side of the business, we're able to actually accomplish now because of AI. So we're just like in a perfect storm, and I mean that in a good way. So over the last year, we've been working hard to use AI as a tool to provide information to retailers so they have information on a daily basis to make decisions. Unlike anything we've been able to do before. So I'm excited to be a part of that. I'm excited for Management One to be, showing leadership in this part of it because what you're going to see and what we're going to launch in the next few months is astonishing. It's staggering, really. And it's all about really giving retailers, the independent retail community, information at their fingertips to make quick decisions. So I'm very excited about that. And I even think these client briefings are just an example of where we're aggregating information in a way we couldn't do before using AI, so that we know what's on the minds of retailers. We know how they're responding. We know not just reacting, because there's a difference between responding and reacting. Responding is really being thoughtful. Reacting is knee jerk and guessing. But we don't have to guess, right? We have information. We have a community that can support and help each other. And I think that's what's materially different today than it was before, because nobody has to live in a silo by themselves anymore. And, you have to break down the walls of, there's always this, I think I grew up in an independent retail family. So secrecy and security and not sharing was part of our DNA, because we didn't want anybody to know what we were doing. But because we thought it gave us some competitive advantage. But I think the tables really turned. Today, information is widespread. Where you get it, how you get it, is important. But getting it from the right source is going to be critical, because AI in itself is a wonderful thing. I mean, who doesn't use it 14 times a day? It used to be Ask Google, now it's Ask Claude, right? I mean, I had a
Yeah.
problem enabling my mobile hotspot. I got on Claude, gave me the exact instructions of what I needed to do. I did it, it worked. But that's for generic things. But when you're really talking about very specific things, you got to be, that's where there's a certain amount of caution. And that's where, as management one, we've been very thoughtful about how we use AI, so that what we're producing using AI is meaningful, directional, and correct, and not open to hallucination or other instances or examples of where AI sounds good but isn't there. So I think what we're working hard to do is adapt it as a tool. These client briefings are a good example of that, because we're collecting information from literally hundreds of meetings, and we know what's on the minds of retailer. We can address what their concerns or issues, what their themes are, and how they're thinking about the business. And to your point, it's fairly positive, so that, we know for a fact that there's a lot of confidence and belief that I can be strong, I can be a good retailer, I can see success, I'm feeling it, I taste it, I want to make it as profitable as I can for myself. So I think that shared wisdom in the community, which is what we're trying, working hard to build and develop, I think will benefit everybody.
Yeah, and again, I just look at this as, when I come from an independent retail family, and there were so many moments where it was just so hard to get information that was specific to independent retail. And so, this is on a scale that I don't think we've seen before. But okay, client briefing,
But
June
I just want to say one thing that I remember as a kid. My dad had like five friends that were in the business in different cities, so they weren't competing. There was no e-commerce 50 years ago. And he would have a Monday call with the five, what happened over the weekend, what was working, what wasn't working. They shared a lot of information. Now we can do that at a grand scale. And so what's working in Miami and what's working in Grand Haven, Michigan could be completely different, but where are they working? Where are the connections? What's similar? What's different? So there's nuance to everything. So it's playing that out and understanding it. And really, that's the beauty of independent retail, because you can curate that for your own audience.
Yeah, and so we're going to jump into the client briefing for June
Yeah.
2026. And, just to reiterate what Marc said, AI has been able to pull a tremendous amount of data for us. This is coming from the aggregate of all our clients across all our verticals, but it's also coming from anonymized data from our hundreds and hundreds of calls with retailers. So we're able to process that and understand what are the hot topics, what are on retailers' minds, and what are they doing, what's working. And so that is how the client briefing for June 2026 is developed. And we're going to start. I see Brad from Tilted Quilters is on. He's a newbie to M1. Hey, Brad, good to see you on here. And so we're going to actually start with the quilt vertical. We saw a 50% increase in sales there. And I think you're going to see that when we talk, the theme of June was hot items driving driving sales and really pushing businesses forward. So what was going on in the quilt industry that we saw that rocket ship?
Well, I think it's not just what's going on in the quilt industry. I think it's the quilt industry is a good example of what can be done in all industries, so we can learn from each other. When I came out of the women's market, but when I went into consulting, for example, I had to learn children's and toys and men's and luxury and everything else, and really editing what worked in different ones back into each individual vertical. You could learn from each other and gain from it. So. I think this was just a top vertical. I think some of it was driven by the 250th anniversary. It generated a wave of quilting activity. Major fabric manufacturers released dedicated and commemorative collections, which I think helped. We're also seeing younger customers, including Gen Z and millennials, get involved. So I think there's a lot of good things that are happening within there. And I think what's really amazing about this is when you think about the sewing and quilt stores, what really drives a lot of their volume is sewing machines. And this wasn't sewing machines that drove business because those are with 3, 4, 5,000 and even up purchases. But it was, it was everyday business. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that. So when people look at, and I mentioned this before, it's always great when a vendor gets hot or a style gets hot or something gets hot, but your underlying core business has to be strong. And what's good and healthy about the quilting business is that core underlying business is strong. Also, for a lot of our clients, they've done a great job of cleaning up old inventory. We've gotten the idea of freshness in their minds. They're selling fresh, they're selling new, and I think that's also opened up the door for growth. Plus, there's a lot of experiential work that goes into quilting stores. They have classes, they have a lot of things that they have a community that they build and support, who are very loyal and committed to each other. So I think in that sense, you were seeing, there's always two cultures going. There's always one trend that's happening and a counter trend that's happening. So on the one hand, we're talking about AI and technology and how people can sit alone at home and with Claude, but there's a counter trend too, and that's
Tactile. People want to be tactile.
yeah, people want to be with each other. And I think when you think about quilting and those kinds of communities, that's very tactile. So I think I believe that that's a trend that's happening. So I would encourage other stores to think about how they create community within their stores. I know a lot of our stores have book groups, and Dane, you talk to a lot of people who do a lot of things. So that tactile part of the business can really lead and drive tremendous benefit and rewards for you into the third and fourth quarter.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you something. The lesson that I think everyone can take away from the quilt vertical is that this is a industry that is, historically maybe known for being a certain type of customer, and they are expanding the pie right now, bringing Gen Z. Who would have thought, right, that Gen Z is now being brought in, and now there is this opportunity to really build a new customer base, and so this is where you got to be sharp, and I think this runs across any it's kind of like in a fashion store when that generation ages out of your store, you're hoping to extend them, and then you need to bring the new generation in. This is where your marketing, your email follow-ups, your systems have to be elite, and this is actually a great place where you can use AI, because you want to make sure you're hitting those new customers that came in, and again, you're building the pie. And I think that that's a great, message to come out of the first half of this year, is that sales are expanding and the pie is expanding. So this is some really great stuff. Now we're going to move on.
But
Go
and I
ahead.
want to add on to
Yeah.
I want to build on that, and I want to build on something I talked about earlier. And that is, in the fabric industry, for example, the closure of Joann Fabrics has sent
Uh-huh.
both fabric shoppers, looking for alternatives. But by the same token, with all the volatility with the Saks and the luxury market, that's really helped our high-end stores. So there's a real opportunity in marketplaces where the competition has exploded. So you really have opportunity to pick up new customers, and be the first alternative, and that's huge. Now it's a matter of, once you get them, maintaining them, sustaining them, building them, making them a part of your ecosystem.
And by the way, this is a perfect example of where AI and really strategic planning differ. And so, when we talk about the closure of Saks and Joanne Fabrics, and AI can't know that, right?
Right.
So you need to respond in those moments. You need to capitalize in those moments. If you are not ready to receive new customers, to have the stock that you need, to see business increasing and then chase goods, if you're relying on just kind of generic insights into your business, you're going to miss those major opportunities, and we could see it right here.
Right. I think that we're only looking at our ecosystem of independent retail. So that's different than if you use generic AI, it's going to look at what's written about Walmart and Target and the big boys. And their businesses are different than ours. They're the way they drive business, their customer profile. There might be some overlap, but for independent retail, it's a different world. And the way things trend, we often run opposite or different than how the big chains do. So having that information that we're building is a completely different environment, a completely different ecosystem. And I want to mention this too for those of you, because I think everybody's always worried and thinking about security. We've gone to great lengths to make sure that our information and data doesn't leak out into the ecosystem. Our AI is protected. It doesn't go out. You mentioned it's anonymized. It's all anonymized. So, when you're sharing information with us, we're not sharing it with others. It stays private to you. So I wanted to be very clear about that. And we go to great lengths to make sure that we ensure that.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't even think that this is, obviously, Mark and I are going to come from the perspective of M1, but like I said, it used to be very hard. I would have the subscription to WWD, and you'd read all the kind of some of the blogs out there, the retail brews, and it's just very hard to get a clear picture of what's happening in independent retail. So, we're going to go jump into some what's hot, because I think that these are some really cool areas. We know that the plush trend exploded, squishies, Nido, that really drove the toy industry. So that was very cool to see. And then, so this is really interesting, right? We saw these huge increases. And if anyone here, this is, some event based, if you've seen it, permanent jewelry. Permanent jewelry. I don't know if Mark, I don't know if you've seen it. I used to have one on
Yeah.
my, they're doing
Okay.
live fitting of jewelry right in the stores. They have a machine, it clasps on permanently. And so it becomes this viral moment in the store. So, that's great to see. And then I want to talk about something big here, the cooling of Birkenstocks.
Yeah.
And it's something that I'm hearing from retailer after retailer after retailer. And now it's played out in the numbers. So we see Birkenstock, UGG, even Hoka showing weak signs and slowing down.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's still holding up in core footwear stores, but for those stores that carried it as an add-on or an extra department, it's really cooled its jets, right?
Yeah.
So
And
go ahead.
no, I was going to say this is, to have that foresight, that's definitely something that came through on, our look back on June. So I think that's an important thing to note.
Well,
Okay.
if you look at all the verticals, the one that hurt the most was footwear. So I think that they're going to go through a transitionary period right now. The great thing about Hoka and On was it sold quickly. It had a fast rotation. You'd be out of stock faster than you could get it back in. Not this kind of margins that existed in some of the other footwear styles and other vendors. So I think, footwear has an opportunity here to reinvent itself, and I think that's a good thing because there's other vendors out there that are strong, that are good, that can deliver results. So again, if you live by one, you'll die by one. But if you live by looking for what's new and what's different and moving with your customer and picking up on it quickly, you have a real opportunity because we're going to go into a new cycle.
Yeah. And listen, you have two options. You could freak out that a brand is slowing down, or you could go out there and find some newness, right?
Yeah.
And That to me is exciting. All right, what was the most over inventoried category of June?
You tell me.
Dresses.
Right, right. Dresses, right.
Dresses. And again, I always think, and let's talk a little bit of fashion here. Some of our apparel retailers. I think there's two trends that were very surprising to see, although maybe not so surprising, and that is some volatility in dresses and volatility in denim.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about dresses first because we actually identified that a couple of months ago when we started. I think we released the first client briefing in March, and we already saw softness in dresses. And we said at the time that customers are moving to sets and both dressy and classic and casual. So whether it was dressier outfits, whether it was athleisure wear in sets, but this desire for component dressing was really starting to stir in the marketplace. It's actually been happening for over a year, probably started happening with athleisure during COVID, but it's morphed and it's evolved and it's changed and it's grown. So we already started to see dollars shift into March and April. It was harder for us to track. Some stores were good about setting up new classes, and I would encourage you when you see shifts in the marketplace, create new classifications, think about it different, be nimble, be agile. Or find ways of tracking it and then explode on it, take advantage of it. So I think the people who saw this transition happening and acted on it didn't get caught with a lot of excess inventory and dresses. People who bought according to last year probably did. But again, we're constantly reforecasting and retrending based on where we see the market moving. And I think we were early adopters in seeing the market move, and we would encourage people to be open to those kinds of changes. These kinds of shifts, they don't happen every season. They happen over time, but when it happens in your particular vertical, you've got to be sensitive to it, aware of it, pay attention to it. And that's where current trending is, really trumps history in a big way. And you've got to be very sensitive to that. Customers always looking for fresh, new, and different. And I think we're in that space right now.
Yeah, again, seeing that trend happen is right. We called it out in March, and now it's coming to fruition in July, when now we're going to see a ton of clearance for the people that didn't respond in that dress category.
Well, and the worst part of it is they're stuck with having to clear out goods, cancel orders. They're afraid of it. You still can't be afraid of dresses. It's still part of the business, but it's going to be a different part of the business. And you have to look at the business differently because, you know, there's always this conversation, brands versus vendors. I mean, brands and vendors versus classifications. They're both important, but class is how people think, right? If they're thinking about dresses, they're gonna maybe there's a hot brand, maybe there isn't, maybe it's a consortium of brands. But when you think about classes, if they're thinking about components, that's different than thinking about dresses. This is a really good example of why looking at your classification structure is so important. And your classification structure doesn't have to always be written in granite. It can be agile and flexible to the demands of changes in the marketplace.
Mm. And as someone who's been in the business for quite some time, there's always this ebb and flow of denim versus other types of bottoms. You're
Right.
right, it was leggings, right? And leggings crushed the denim business, right? You just saw everybody wearing leggings. You know what it is now? Everyone is wearing fashion pants. The
Right.
wider, the bigger, the balloonier. Fashion pants have just exploded. So, you always have that ebb and flow in denim. And so gives you the opportunity to actually look and take a real hard look at what your denim assortment is. Because what's still doing well in denim is there's that barrel pant, the barrel denim, which is continues to explode. So if you're still out there and your assortment is all skinny jeans, um, listen, of course, it's going to depend on region to region, but what we're seeing is it's driven by the barrel jean. So that is what people are responding to. And then there's this pant trend right now that's happening. So, we're talking about a very specific segment, but this applies across the board when you're looking at ebbs and flows in categories.
Right. And in denim, it's really always about buying the fit because that's ultimately what sells. So, if you've got a vendor that fits your customer, that's important to know and understand and be deep in the fit first, and everything else, everything good will happen from there. But don't be over assorted in denim, and always be willing to try a new look, test it, see what works, and then if it works, go for it.
Yeah, and that oversorting, and this is something that we repeat again and again, especially when I'm on the road. The number one reason that the number one reason why stores get overbought is because they're over assorted. So this is a real time to really look at your vendors in a certain category and really start to, have some hard decisions. And just because a vendor has been there for a few years, a bunch of years, you love the rep, that doesn't mean that they are right for your business in this moment. Fun fact, I just want to give a little fun shout out to the following e-bikes. E-bikes are seeing a big moment. Incense and crystals. The metaphysical stores are seeing a big moment right now. And also, and I know this just from anecdotal, my two huskies, freeze dried and frozen pet food, that is a huge, that, kind of no more kibble. We're really seeing this huge increase in frozen and freeze dried pet food. So just some interesting notes there. Okay, Marc, I want to switch gears a little bit. And, we talked a little inflation, and what we're really seeing work right now, and I love the way that you phrase this, the quiet price increase. What do we
Yeah.
mean by the quiet price increase?
So I'm going to explain that in a different way, Dane. So if you give me a moment to talk about it,
You got the floor.
having been in the business for over 40 years, I've been through a lot of life cycles with a lot of retailers, and many who have retired and closed their businesses and moved on over the years. And in each and every case, we'd always plan for the retirement sale, and goods would come in for the season, and I'd say, take an extra 5 or 10 points. Because we want to get that margin bill for when you go on sale and have the final closeout. So there'd always be this period of time between when goods would land and the sale would happen, and the sale would happen towards the middle, towards the end of the period or the season. And and I can say this unequivocally, 100% of the time, retailers always came back and said, if I knew I could have gotten another 5 or 10 points, I would have done it a long time ago. And then they'd figure out all the money they lost over the course of the years. So that's what we really mean about quiet. Take that extra margin. So going back to these clearance, the retirement sales. So what would happen is, while they were still in the regular price selling period, they recognized that the stuff that they were taking a higher mark on was selling at the same velocity. There was no pushback from the customer on price. So, it was looking in the mirror and saying, oh my gosh, what have I missed over all these years? So I think that now, because, expenses are going up, the margins that we worked with before, need to be inflated a little bit. That's why we're seeing a big move towards private label. But even in branded goods, where you can get an initial markup that's a little bit higher, that all adds up at the end of the season, cushions you for markdowns later on, but also raises the price. And, is part of the reason I believe that we're seeing increases the way we're seeing it. So,
Yeah, and you could see it just in this simple fact, right? Sometimes you see these run in inverse, but we actually saw an increase in luxury retail and an increase in fast fashion.
right.
And I think a big part of that is you're seeing, and again, and this is, time and time again, you use that great retirement sales story. But fast fashion retailers are very resistant to increasing prices, right? They think that and I have these conversations over and over, if you're selling it for $23, you could probably sell it for $27. And they're very resistant to those price increases. But the inflation forced them to kind of increase. Private label is forcing them to think about margin differently and building those prices into it. And guess what? It worked, right? So you see luxury going up. The people that have money, they're spending money. But you also see a willingness for fast fashion retailers to increase pricing, which is leading to that increase in sales. So a great lesson there.
Well, they've had to increase prices because their costs are up. I mean, their
Right.
costs that they're paying, their wholesale prices are up. But I would also encourage those clients that are in fast fashion to bring in some branded goods. Now's the time to try them and test them because price resistance isn't there. But just differentiate yourself from the marketplace. Don't copy what you're doing, but do something different where there's value. I mean, if you want to bring a brand in, now's the time to do it. And it'll enhance you. It'll give you a competitive advantage. It allows you to differentiate yourself in the market. So I think there's that opportunity to do that. The way you develop your merchandising strategy is always got to be ongoing and evolutionary.
Yeah, and okay, so now let's look at the flip side of that. And hindsight is 2020, but we just had this huge July 4th, 250 years, a huge moment. A lot of retailers capitalized on that and used it to move product. So this sometimes seems like a binary, right? Where okay, we're increasing prices, we're seeing it there, and people then get afraid of clearance, but I think that you saw that 250, that July 4th, as a huge vehicle to move those old goods.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, we have fall, unless you're a seasonal summer store, right? And your business is just peaking over July 4th, and you're going to be regular price through towards the end of the season. Aside from that cohort of retailers, the rest of us who are moving into fall quickly, remember, fall starts to land now through the end of July. So you want to cash out of your spring and summer inventory transition, whether you're going to transition or fall, you want to be doing that, and cashing out of what you own and turning it into cash to pay for new goods is critical. But also be thoughtful that as you're selling those, it's an opportunity to talk to your salespeople. If they're buying a sale, try to also include some new fresh goods in there to raise the margin on each one. And also, as you're going after sale, look at most of you have POS systems. Look at your clients who you sell at a margin of 20 to 40%. Those are, the bottom feeders. Market specifically to them, and maybe keep your high margin customers out of the sale loop, or maybe you want to reward them. But think about how you market that because, Dane, you've talked about this often. There's a group of customers who help you clean up your store. And that's not a bad thing.
You know what? It's the circle of life. It's the food chain of retail. It's the ecosystem. There's going to be there are customers that only want to pay full price. They view it as like a sense of pride. They want the new, they want the best. And then you're going to have your customers that are going to be your sale customers, and both are important. So, why clearance is so important now, in my opinion. And listen, this is something that we preach all the time. We're at the end of summer. We want to get those goods out before the transition to fall. But why it's so important now is because we're seeing this explosion of certain products and product categories. And if you don't have that money to buy back into the areas that are exploding, right? If a vendor opens up stock and they have ATS in the styles, or the type of product that you're looking for, and you don't have the cash to pay for it, that's why it's more important this year than I've seen in a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearing out old stock is, the sooner you do it, the better. And again, everybody's seasonally adjusted. So I get it if you're in a seasonal store on the coast and, you're riding a high and this is your season. You don't want to be running sales, except maybe picking out some things that aren't working, being thoughtful about that. But for the most of us, you really want to be moving into the next season.
All right, so Mark, we got a question from Brad from Tilted Quilters, new client to Management One. What are your thoughts on adding an extra fee for using credit cards? It frustrates me to no end. I feel like I'm being punished for using a credit card when that is the main way to pay these days. What do you say, Mark?
That's a tough question. I think that you're probably better off building it in your markup, and not, punishing the customer for the charge.
Yeah, and I think that is key here, right? See where you can build in that 3% increase into certain product. There are going to be areas you can't because they're competitive product and people are price shopping. There are going to be products that you can build it in there. I think when you slap on that 3% and you make it very visible, that's when you start getting into, that's a customer service issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens is no matter how you want to justify it in your own mind, the customer doesn't because they think, they think what you spend, what you charge $100 for, you're paying $10 for. That, I mean, that's what they think. So I think it's a hard thing to sell. I mean, I know it happens in restaurants and in other places, they get away with it. But I think in retail, it's just a really difficult thing to do. Do
By
a
the way, Mark, what is going on in restaurants? I feel like every time I go out to dinner, there's a new fee added, a water fee, a service fee, a
cook
chair
fee.
fee, a napkin
Yeah, here, tip
fee.
the cook.
Different.
So So I think that let them play in that world. Brad, I would do a break even, and your credit card costs are going to be like 2 to 3%. Work with your bank, join an association that's negotiated better fees. But playing that game with the customers is it's you want to win customers over, find other ways to delight them, but don't get into a fight with them over that.
Okay, I want to talk gift and home. Okay, because this was an interesting one. I'm going to put you on the spot again, Mark. Do you know what drove the increases in gift and home?
I'm waiting for you to tell me, Dan. Dane.
Events,
Wow.
events. Yeah, it was all, a great amount of it was event driven. And again, this is just showing you that I think this is the story coming out of June is these focused hot, 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 red hot areas. Do you know what the leading event was?
I have no idea.
Mahjong.
Mahjong. Oh,
Right. And then this goes right back to when we were talking about quilt and sew, who would have thought that 30-year-olds, 20-year-olds are going in and buying Mahjong sets? I mean, in your lifetime, did you think that you would see that?
no. I mean, I remember we used to play another tile game when I was in my 30s. I can't even remember the name of it, but it was a takeoff on Mahjong. So no, I mean, you mentioned it before, tactile. So there you go.
And people are doing events in the store, mahjong nights, game nights. And again, this is why you could see it in different areas, and why I would encourage you, even if we're talking about quilt, even if we're talking about gift and home, you really got to think about how you could apply this to your business. But it's the events, it's increasing the pie to a new generation. It's that tactile, people wanting to touch and not just be behind an AI screen all day, and that community aspect. So I would really encourage any vertical that we're talking about, really try to see how you could apply this to your business.
Well, but even in the luxury vertical, made to measure and special order and trunk shows are still strong because people want to show up for events.
Trunk shows drove a lot of business in luxury, so that's
Yeah.
another area. Again, it's very thematic what's going on, and this is why, right? And this is why sharing information, because it is, when something happens, it is not just happening, rarely isolated to a very specific corner of independent retail. You
Right.
know, there's always going to be certain blips that are very specific to a certain type of store, but these trends run through independent retail in the community. Okay, you want to hear a fun one?
Yes, I do.
A $200 local newspaper ad outperformed digital placements.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is a real interesting one, that when we're looking at, we looked at a lot of marketing data from the year, and we understand, and by the way, outperformed meaning there was a bigger ROI, because the cost of acquiring a customer is just growing and growing. And there's been a shift back to, and again, the tactile theme of this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, if you can do it, I mean, if you're a large enough retailer where you've got vendors that'll work with you and support you, go back to building your own catalog and get the vendors to support the whole thing. I mean, that's for a little larger size retailer, but if you are, do it, or do joint publications. I think people love looking through catalogs. I mean, I think we've seen an increase in the catalogs we receive at home, and they're not inexpensive to send out, so they must be working. And I think that and I said it before, there's always a trend and a counter trend. I mean, we've done for the stores that have done well, and on live selling, you'll continue to do well. It's still an important piece of the puzzle. A lot of you have seen spectacular growth through that vehicle, but that doesn't mean that old-fashioned digital is a thing. and digital is a trend. And I think that there's an opportunity to be in front of a customer in a new way. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay, we got
Yeah, that blew
another
my
intro.
mind too.
Say that again.
That $200 newspaper ad blew my mind too.
Isn't that crazy? And even mailers, right? Mailers, catalogs. And again, I think it speaks to this theme of tactile. So consignment. Consignment has been a mixed bag here. We're seeing growth there, right? There's a lot of growth in the consignment business, and it's kind of now moving into stores that you wouldn't normally expect to have consignment goods, but it's been a mixed bag. Um, can you talk a little bit about how it's been messing with margins and cost of goods?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the allure of consignment is always good, but there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Free isn't always free. So if you're getting consignment, it may not be the best product, but it might be. But be careful you're not competing with the stuff that you're buying, and that's the lesson there. Because if you sell a consignment good and you've also bought something similar from a vendor, you still owe that purchase order, you still owe for that, and now you've sold a consignment good, so you've gotten it's not a positive win for you. It's a negative because you're going to probably have to mark down that other item. So think about consignment differently. I mean, it can be a positive if you're bringing in goods that you're not buying from vendors, or you're opening up a new category or new classification, and you can do it on consignment rather than, having to buy the goods up front. I think that's a positive way. So consignment is a strategic decision. Think about it, but make sure you're not competing with yourself when you get involved with consignment.
Yeah, and one of the areas where this really worked was fast fashion businesses bringing in consignment luxury goods, right? And
Right.
so, that's an example. You're not competing with your own product, right?
Right.
So that was a great way
Well, a
that we.
lot of luxury stores, a lot of their jewelry is consignment, and that's fine. So, I mean, you could carry hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of jewelry, and not have to pay for it till you sell it, and then do trunk shows with them and events. So, there's a place for consignment. It certainly can be part of your merchandising mix, but just be thoughtful about it when you put it, and just be super careful you're not competing with what you're already buying.
Okay. And Mark, we're coming up to the end of our conversation. We have a solid 10 minutes left. So I just want to open it up to people watching live right now. Please, this is your chance. Put your questions right in the chat. We'll get to them live right here. I see we may have one in our Q&A. Okay, here we go. How can you handle granularity through attribute tags without reclassing or without using hierarchical classification in general? Well, this is an anonymous attendee, but I will kind of answer this and kick this off. That is very dependent on what point of sale you're using. But Marc, I think you can speak to the incredible, we just launched it with Shopify, and that has changed the game in terms of our ability to bring in SKU level data. And we're going to be launching that with a few new point of sale systems. So can you just talk a little bit about the importance of bringing in that SKU level data? I think that will answer this question.
Yeah, so hierarchies are important. So what happens at the class level, what sells by class, by brand, and then down to the granularity of the SKU, the style, the color, the size even, because with the weight loss drugs, I mean, sizing has become a big deal, right? So, the size scales you may have used previously aren't necessarily the size scales you'd want to use today. So I think they're all important. So I think the attributes, in color, brand, SKU, style are all important, which is why we're ingesting data from all the major point of sale systems, because it's not just, how do you take you know, how do I take 100, let's say $50,000 in open to buy, and how do I break it down by brand, by vendor, by style, by SKU, by size? Those assortments are critical and important. So keeping track of that is going to be part of the future. We're all over it, and we're going to be provide. When I talked about giving you information that's ready, that's what we're working towards and what we're launching in the next couple of weeks, really.
Yeah, and I do want to, I'm not sure if this if and you could write in if we're talking about Shopify or not, but there is a reason why it's very hard to look at attribute tags for classification, and that is because they can change and they could double, right? So you could have multiple attribution tags for one item or one SKU, and so there is a method to our madness of why product type is the most sound place because it is unchanging, and that will actually be able to track the SKU by its classification.
Right. I mean, I think, but that goes back to discipline, and I want to talk a little bit about discipline. Um, when you make mistakes on putting the right attribute or the right class to a purchase, that impacts, you're not reading what the think about it this way. I'm going to rephrase this. Every time the customer makes a purchase, they make a vote. That was something I learned from Dennis Levine, who was really the one that got me started in, developing planning for consultants. He was actually our first one. And one thing that Dennis always used to say is every time a customer buys something, they vote. Well, if you don't tag that correctly, you can't read the demand correctly. That's how important the discipline is required to make sure that you're monitoring what the customers are telling you. Our ability to read that demand is critical to your future. Picks up trends, it picks up where the business is going. It allows you to where to reinvest your dollars. So discipline is a key piece of the puzzle for the third and fourth quarter. So if you're sloppy in your operational work, it's not going to be a friend to you in trying to solve future questions and decisions you have to make about the business. So discipline is a critical piece of your success right now. And the time you take to invest to do it right, enter those purchase orders, do them correctly, receive them correctly is super important. It pays you dividends. It actually creates profit. I know the time seems difficult and challenging at times, but your future success and your ability to create profit is really depending on being by employing best practices. I can't be more emphatic about how important that is.
Yeah, and people tend to, when sales are good, best practices start to slip,
Yeah.
right? And so this is a really crucial time as we're seeing this, fantastic, optimism and kind of sales growth. We also want to make sure that that's not, that best practices are not falling by the wayside.
Right.
So, Mark, I do want to shift in these final minutes, and I do want to talk about the future, right? So we got a lot of information about where we're at, where we've been. What's your, we can talk data or we can talk, your gut feel on where we're moving to in the second half of the year.
Well, cautiously optimistic is a phrase a lot of people like to use, but I would say that, we've been through a lot together, and I think that there's a reason to be optimistic. I know that there's a concern about, interest rates going up, because of inflation. I think that could be expected. I can't read the tea leaves on that kind of stuff, but the fact is we've absorbed the shock. And I think that the customers are going to be very open and continue to be receptive to what you do, to what you provide. You just have to be on top of your game and be thoughtful about it and use all the tools that you can to stay ahead. But I'm very optimistic about where we're going. From an independent retail standpoint, I think it's a good time for us. I think we offer a lot that to the community that they can't get anywhere else. And I think that you've positioned yourselves in locations that work. A lot of you have very good e-commerce or digital sites where customers can see you and understand you. I think you tell your stories well. Remember, this is really a storytelling business. And
Mm.
the way that you think and are creative about how you tell your story is very important. And stay fresh with that. And you do that through new vendors, you do that through, delivery of new fashion. I mean, one great thing about this business is there's always a new story to tell. There's always something to get excited about, to hype. So make sure your people are included in that they know your story, so you're consistent in the message that you give to your audience. and broadcasting that consistently and well only gives you tremendous returns. And be excited about it because customer trusts you, they believe in you, they want to believe in you, they want to be in a place that's authentic and real in a world that they don't see that way. So you have an opportunity to serve that purpose, and that's a wonderful thing that you get to do. You can go to bed at night actually feeling that you've given to your community. In every crisis that I've been involved with in retail in my life, outside crises, in every single time, where's the customer gone? They've gone back to you. When 9/11 hit, everybody was glued to their TVs, during that whole episode. But 2 to 3 weeks later, at the end of September, early October, it was like Christmas time in our stores because where did customers wanted to be? They wanted to be in stores with their friends, with the community they knew and they trusted.
Mm.
That is our legacy. That is what makes independent retail strong. When COVID ended, we saw everybody, the conventional wisdom was everybody learned to Shopify online and through Amazon. But what happened when the shutdowns ended? They ran back to the stores with reckless abandon. It was like the roaring 20s. So why shouldn't we be optimistic about our future?
By the way, it quite literally was the Roaring Twenties.
Yeah, it was.
The return of the Roaring Twenties. Well, Marc, this was a great conversation, and we're going to send out the June client briefing. But I would really encourage sit down with this, take a look through it. This is so crucial. I think this benchmarking aspect, moving forward into the future, is really critical for retailers to understand the full totality of the independent world. And again, and I just want to emphasize this because I hope that this is a big takeaway. What happens in one part of independent retail influences the other parts of in independent retail. So, I just got back from Whizbang, the Retail Success Summit. I know some of you guys were there. And, this is the sharing of ideas. It's not only about if I'm a menswear guy, I'm a menswear guy, and this is what's happening in menswear. If I'm a kitchen store, I'm a kitchen store, and this is what's happening in kitchen stores. There are themes and trends and higher level thinking that runs through all of this. And this is what we're doing with Indie Insight. So it's great to see it happening.
Well, thanks for hosting the podcast. And by the way, Dane has a series of podcasts with Josh Order that are great, lots of great tidbits and insights. And we're going to have weekly podcasts and in-depth webinars for all of you. So stay tuned. There's more great stuff coming. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
Claudia.
We'll see you next week on Indie Insights Live.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Dane.